Hi friends. I got both very busy during the summer and then very lazy about making content, but before I can just move on with the fall, I feel like it would be unfair to everything I read over the summer to just, breeze by and not give it a moment to be shared on this channel. Some of these I loved enough that I really wanted to make individual reviews, but it just didn't end up happening, and that might work out I might do that in the future. The first book that I read in June was Wuthering by Emily Bronte. Honestly, I felt quite ambivalent towards it. There were a few things that I didn't enjoy about it. I don't like the sort of Victorian literary technique of having a person that is like you're receiving the story through another person who's receiving the story secondhand. So you sort of have these like levels of removal, and I really don't like that. But that aside, I think that my dilemma was that I just wasn't sure that I was getting what was so great about it, what was so wonderful about it. I thought it was fine. I might have had more antagonistic feelings if I was forced to read it for school, but then again, if I was reading it in a classroom setting, I might have been given more of a framework for how to interpret and analyze what I was reading, which would have made me like it more. So this is one that honestly, I think I need to reread again, maybe at a future time, and maybe in a book that has like more footnotes and analysis that can contextualize some of the content in a way that will help me understand how I'm supposed to be appreciating it. So I think I gave it like 3 stars because I thought it was all right, but I didn't emotionally connect to it very much. Like I didn't love it. The next book I read is IGen, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood and What That Means for the Rest of Us by Jean M. Twenge. This book is all about IGen, which is the generation that begins in 1995, I believe. The breaking point there is that that's the year that the internet became commercialized, the idea being that this generation is the first one to grow up not only with the internet invented, but prevalent among everyone. iPhones in their hands, and the internet changing their access to information, the way they socialize. The kinds of challenges and opportunities are different than any other generation in the history of the world, and that it's significant that we try and understand those things because they're going to be different than the experiences that millennials or Gen X or baby boomers experience. We can't approach solving them in the same way. This was a really interesting book and I quite enjoyed it. Some of the things I read in this book I actually really felt like were good explanations for the patterns of behaviors that I had even noticed in the IGeners that I socialize with. If you work with IGeners or like teenagers, you might find this book worthwhile. The next book I read is called Good and Mad, The Revolutionary Power of Women's Anger by Rebecca Traister. The central idea of this book is the author exploring the cultural reaction to Trump being elected and the Women's March after his inauguration, and as well as incorporate into that the entire idea of the Me Too movement and the way that women expressing anger and their frustrations with the current accepted norms is having an effect in revolutionizing those cultural norms. I found this book very interesting, though by the end I wouldn't say that I necessarily agree with the author, not because it's not valid to be angry at many if not all of the points that she brings up, but because I personally don't think that anger is the most sustainable source of energy for social change. This is another book that I would like to do a longer review on. It was interesting, but I didn't love it. I think I gave it like 3 stars. The next book that I read is The Secret Life of Fat, The Science Behind the Body's Least Understood Organ and What It Means for You by Sylvia. Without getting into a lot of the details because I don't have time here, the discussion of fat as an organ and the purpose that it serves for our body and how useful it is, what happens when you have too much of it, what happens when you don't have enough of it, what is too little and what is too much. The first half of the book I really enjoyed because of all of its information, but the book did end with the author incorporating everything she learned about fat so that she could accomplish her weight loss goals, which to me, undermined the first half of the book, which was in fact recognizing the importance of fat and that we culturally dismiss it as being sort of a necessary evil or else just pure evil, and the less the better. And that's not true. It's actually a really important organ. To spend the first half of the book promoting that narrative, only to use the second half of the book to use everything you know about fat to like hack your own fat loss, it felt like in the end it promoted diet culture, and it just undermined the author's ideas. The next book I read is called The Moment of Lift: How Empowering Women Changes the World by Melinda Gates. Melinda Gates is co-president, I think, of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with her husband Bill, obviously, and for decades they have worked on improving the quality of life for people in poverty around the world. This book is essentially about how their decades of experience have led them to the conclusion that the best way to help the greatest number of people is to focus on empowering women, whether that's through their education, through giving them loans, through giving them access to family planning, talking to men and women about respecting women and giving them legal equality, giving them social equality, valuing their education equal to men, things like that. I loved this book because I love this kind of book. I work for a nonprofit and I've lived in developing countries. I really enjoy the psychology of it. I love reading books that have pinpointed the most effective way to provoke behavioral change regardless of cultural context. I just find it really, really fascinating. I think it's very interesting as a focus on female empowerment, that the attitude in this book is radically different than the attitude in Good and Mad, which is very anger motivated. In this one, Melinda Gates, who is very religious, is actually very love and service motivated in her empowerment of women. And in my opinion, I think that is more effective and that her work has been much more effective. The next book I read is HS4 Hawk by Helen Macdonald. I listened to it on audiobook and the author is a fantastic narrator. It's a memoir of a few years of the author's life, where she's both grieving the death of her father and training a Gus Hawk. It was gorgeously written, and while I didn't have like really deep personal reasons to connect to the author, I found everything that she wrote about so relatable and so poignantly human. I would love to read this book again and to review it, to give it its own review. So I'm going to stop here with this little summary that doesn't do it justice because I just couldn't. The next book I read is a nonfiction book called The Judgment of Paris: The Revolutionary Decade That Gave the World Impressionism by Ross King. I did an entire, very long and detailed review in a separate video, so I'm not going to get into it. But like I said, this is a nonfiction book about Impressionism. It's really about the years before Impressionism, specifically focusing on Ernest Meissonier and Edouard Manet. I really enjoyed this book. I found it very informative, but if you're not a history junkie, this might be a bit thick and overly detailed for you. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The last book that I will share here is called The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie. It's the first in the Flavia de Luce mysteries by Alan Bradley. This is the story of Flavia de Luce. She's maybe like 11 years old or so. She's a chemist. She loves chemistry, and well, she becomes a bit of a detective. Her father ends up getting wrapped up in a little bit of a murder mystery, and she becomes a sleuth, and her detective skills obviously solve the crime. It's a children's story, but there were a lot of references that I feel like were meant for adults. There were references to like classic literature. I feel like there were references to like some Greek myths or things like that. Just like little offhanded comments. Definitely some intense chemistry in there. There were levels of intelligence in there that made it accessible for young audiences and could be appreciated by older audiences as well. These are all the books I read in June, July, and August, everything I read over the summer. There were actually a few other books that I got most of the way through and then didn't finish before leaving, like to come here to France, and so I need to find a way to find those and finish those. But apart from that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in a future video. Bye!